everyone, and welcome to the BFI Flare Festival 2021. Woo! And to this discussion, family values. My name is Jess Haygarth. I'm a BFI young programmer, and I'll be hosting this discussion. Just a few housekeeping things to get through before we start. For all those viewing, we'd love for you to engage with the discussion through the chat and Q&A boxes, which is at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A box at the bottom of the screen will be managed by Emma from the BFI and is where you can ask questions for our panelists. So please place your questions in there just throughout the event, and then we'll try and get to them in the last 15 minutes or so. Our chat box at the bottom of the screen will be managed by Alex from the BFI and be where you can ask questions related to the Flare Film Festival, the Future Film Festival, Scenes Labs, and any other BFI Academy events. Please, please, please be respectful of each other in the chat. I'm sure you will be, and just try not to reveal any personal information. We'd also love for you to introduce yourselves and network with each other. So if you'd like to do that, then you can join the Facebook networking group. There's a link to that just being put in the chat now. So you can join that now or afterwards and yeah, get to know each other. This event is being recorded. The recording will be uploaded to the BFI YouTube channel next week. So be sure to check that out and then you can share it with your friends as well. So yeah, let's begin our event, Family Values. In this discussion, we'll be discussing the films Sweetheart and Colors of Tobi, which focus on queerness and family. Both films are available to watch now on the BFI player. So if you haven't had a chance to watch them yet, then please be sure to do so after the event because they're really fantastic. I'd like to ask the panelists to pop their cameras on now so we can see your lovely faces. Hi. I'm so thrilled to be joined by the director of Colors of Tobi, Alexa Bakony, and the producer of Sweetheart, Michelle Antoniades. Alexa is a Hungary-based director. She graduated as a film director from the University of Theatre and Film Arts Budapest. Her debut feature-length documentary, Colors of Tobi, is supported by the Sundance Institute and the National Film Institute Hungary. Thank you so much for joining us, Alexa. Michelle is a London-based producer. She is part of the production company Hazy Jane Films, with which she's produced award-winning shorts Leroy and Baby Gravy, just to name a few of them, there's loads. Her debut feature, Sweetheart, was funded through the Film London Microwave Scheme with BBC Films and BFI and was the winner of the Glasgow Film Festival Audience Award, which is super exciting. Congrats. Thank you both so much for joining us. So Sweetheart and Colors of Tobi are two very different films. One is a coming of age story about a family staycation, and the other is a documentary about the changing dynamic between a mother and her transgender child. However, both of these films use a familial lens to ask big questions about belonging and allyship. Queerness and family were the focus of Michelle and Marley Morrison's film Sweetheart, as well as their previous short Baby Gravy, and in spending 4 years making Colors of Tobi, Alexa almost became one of the family herself. I can only imagine. In this discussion, we'll be asking Alexa and Michelle why they chose to address these themes of family and queerness, how you foster familiar intimacy on screen, and what is important when exploring queer narratives through a familiar lens. So let's get started. Alexa, I'd love to start by asking you a bit about Colors of Tobi, but before we start that discussion, Fiona, could you please play the trailer for Colors of Tobi?
Ugye kérdezték, hogy neked hány gyereked van? 3. Fiúk vagy lányok? És én itt lefagyok. is. Na itt kérted meg, hogy vágjam sömére a hajadat. Itt először vágtam le.
És milyen boldog voltam. Az összes lányos képeimet szereted.
De mennyire zavart téged? Hát az is te voltál.
Nem.
De nagyon jó ló.
Én nem akarom, hogy téged bántson bárki is. És akkor mutass már képet róluk, és akkor tudod, és ő Tóbiás. Nem haragszol, ez nekem még olyan furcsán hangzik.
Thanks, Fiona, and thank you so much for sharing that with us, Alexa. I loved the film. I found it so powerful, and it was just such an intimate story. So I'd like to start just by asking, what inspired you to make a film that focused on the journey of a trans child and their family?
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for having me here. Yeah, it's very hard to answer this question because it's very, very hard to explain how it started. But I think it started from the feeling that you feel somehow different in your lives than the other family members of yours. I think that was the main idea in my case. And I just really, when I met them, I really fell in love with their personalities. And I felt that we have a very nice chemistry. And I really felt that they can, like, I wanted to make a documentary about the family, and I wanted to go deep. And Queerness was just like the top of the iceberg. I just wanted to explore those dynamics between them. And yeah, it was a slow process. First, I started to do photographs about them, and I was then doing interviews and a little exploration, like how can I tell their story? Mm-hmm. And then a crew joined me later, and then we started to work for almost 4 years.
Wow. Yeah, I think Tobi's personality really shines through in the documentary, and they just seem like such a bright and amazing human being. It feels like a privilege to watch 4 years of their life. How did you originally meet them and their family? And could you talk a bit about how you built up enough of a relationship to kind of make the documentary?
We met through a friend, and then I realized that they live very close to my grandmother's village. It takes part in the eastern part of Hungary, and I was familiar with the area, familiar with the mentality, the people. And one summer, it was the summer of 2016, I went there, and then we started to talk about how to work together. And they wrote also some articles in newspapers about their situations, and a lot of media wanted to find them and work with them, but they didn't want to be a sensation. Mm-hmm. They wanted to show their stories and being inspiring for other families and other queer people and other, like, how to deal with this issue. And I think that's what I wanted to do and what they wanted to show matched somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you achieved that a lot because the documentary feels really open and honest. Yeah, and just like really intimate to watch. How did you deal with balancing making the documentary as truthful as possible whilst also kind of respecting the family's privacy and minimizing like any potential conflicts that could have been created through making the documentary?
Yeah, it was very, I was in a very responsible position because, mm-hmm. you know, they gave me a lot of personal information. I was in their lives, and I wanted to keep their trust and not to use the information I have in a bad way. Mm-hmm. And I always told them that making this film shouldn't be more important than their personal lives. So if something is too much, if we come too often, if you don't want to share something, just tell me and it's okay. And also when Tobi was very sure about the physical transition, I felt a huge responsibility not to push him in a situation of a surgery just because I would like to have a film, because it wouldn't be fair. And I was always reminding myself that it's just a film, it's okay. And my attitude was to adapt to the changes of their lives. And I felt like the screenwriter was just life, who always gave me a fresher version of the script every single day. And I had to be very, very adaptive to those changes and show their real story.
That's really interesting, and also such a good piece of advice for documentary filmmakers who might be watching, that the documentary is never more important than the personal life. I think that also shines through quite a lot in the film. In your statement about the film, you mentioned that even with an accepting family, it can be really difficult to be part of the LGBTQI plus community. I totally agree. And I think that in narratives where we see queer children and their families, we often see kind of a family that's completely accepting or a family that's completely unaccepting. And with Colors of Tobi, I felt it really showed how complex it is to navigate your queer identity with your parents. Was that something you were kind of hoping to show from the start, or did that just grow out of Tobi and their relationship with their family?
I think it worked a little bit both ways. Like their behavior inspired me a lot, but I also, yes, I had a feeling that a lot of films are very like black and white, total ignorance or getting your child out of the family. That is quite often the narrative, and the other narrative is to dive into the rainbow immediately, and it's not true. So I wanted to make a film where we can have an inside view of a family who has a queer child and to live through the process with them. And I also felt like because I think the mother, Eva, is a key figure in this film, because as a mother, she has the right to ask the questions we all wanted to ask. And I think it's important to build a bridge between cis and trans people and somehow include cis people more in queer topic or trans topic, because I think they really need some guidance.
Yeah. Just thinking about that, Colors of Tobi is obviously set in your home country of Hungary. What are the attitudes towards trans people, especially trans young people in Hungary?
The situation here is not very great. There was a law called 33, and this law says that you cannot change your gender, and you will always have the birth gender in your ID, whatever you do. So for young trans people, it's quite a desperate situation, because even if you are able to change your ID, the birth gender will be always there, and you always have to come out at a hospital or at any authorities, and it's very it's not okay. And there are some little improvements, because they wanted to use this law to go back in time and to do this with all the trans people who already have the new ID and the complete change of gender, and it's not possible to do it. So I'm very happy that you cannot go back in time and change the things. Yeah, so it could be better here.
Yeah, I think again in the UK as well, the situation or people's reactions to trans people are in general just not good, and it's not supported by the government at all either. And that's like a horrible reality of it that is kind of shown in the film. But also what really struck me in the film is just how much joy there is for Tobi, and we see really beautiful moments between them and their family, but also them with their friends and kind of going out. There's one scene where they look like they're clubbing, which made me really sad, because I was like, I want to be there. But there's just so much joy. Was that something that, again, did that just come out of Tobi and following their life, or is that something that was particularly important for you to kind of have in the film?
Like, I just wanted to show how an average teenager lives their life, because like, of course, Tobi has to tackle with their queerness, but otherwise they are a regular teenager clubbing and partying and having fun. And of course, like, to show how unique Tobi's position is because of the family they have. Yeah, so that was the idea. Sorry if I sometimes miss using the pronouns in a bad way, but in Hungarian language there are no genders in pronouns. So that's why I'm doing this. Sorry.
That's really interesting and useful. Yeah, I think there's something really beautiful in that as well, in that it's obviously Tobi is a queer person, but also they are just a person, and showing every aspect of their life, I think is something, again, you managed to achieve really well. By kind of choosing to focus solely on one family and their queer child, were you hoping that the film would encourage viewers to be more accepting towards queer people and especially trans youth?
Yeah, this was my intention. Yes, I really hope that this film can change a lot, and I think it's because of this family angle that was not really shown before, and also because of the intimacy and the depth. I really think that it can change a lot. I'm hoping for this.
Yeah. Also, I found time really interesting in the film, and how, obviously, over a process of 4 years, how do you go about then making that, kind of cutting down all that footage and making it into the film, and also like choosing whether to do it chronologically or to kind of change the timing? Could you just talk a bit about time and how that worked in the film?
Yes, time was very crucial in our situation, and like we had to wait for things to happen. And I think this film wouldn't be the same if this time would be shorter, because I felt that there is a key moment around the end when Tobi is finishing high school and starts their other lives in the capital, the separation from Eva, the mother. Mm-hmm. I felt that it was very important, and we wanted to wait for this moment for sure. And the film is built up like it seems that it's chronological, but in reality it is not.
Okay.
So with my editor Mariana, we were working on an emotional arc, we call it, and because it was very tricky how to give the informations to build up the story, not to give too much but give enough to understand. And it was a very, very it's like a puzzle that we had to figure out somehow.
Do you think you'll make another documentary that is, again, like you have a filming period that spans over 4 years? Is that something you'd be interested in doing again, or are you looking to do something that's a bit quicker next time?
Yeah, I really love documentaries, and I think that I will do something similar in the future, because I love to go deep and I love to explore a topic in real depth. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And just based off of that, what tips can you give to, there'll probably be some emerging filmmakers watching. So what, have you got any tips or any advice for people who want to make documentaries in general, or documentaries specifically centering around queer people?
I think for young filmmakers, it's important to always have plans. And even if a plan it's not working, be able to let it go and start something new. And I also advise to apply to many pitching events, because I was pitching in a lot of different workshops, and it helped me a lot, because I got a perspective from the outside point of view, and I always had a chance before pitching to collect my thoughts, and it helped a lot. Yeah.
And how did you first get into making film, or making documentary film specifically?
Good question. Like I'm not identify as just a documentary filmmaker. I'm also interested in fiction, but documentary is something that just grabbed me. And I was watching a lot of great documentaries during film school, and my teacher, Tamás Almási, he is a quite famous documentary filmmaker in Hungary. Mm-hmm. And his point of view influenced me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I think that's quite often the case, that documentary filmmakers don't just make documentary film, but that there's something special in there. that really, yeah, grabs your attention, or especially as you've said, you like to explore stories that and go really deep into them. I guess documentary filmmaking offers you a real chance to do that. And if you have any advice for filmmakers, documentary filmmakers maybe specifically, who have made their first documentaries, what's the next step? Once you've made the piece of work, what would you say is the next most important thing to do?
After finishing the film, or
Yeah.
like to have an idea where to present it. And also like to, around the time you are finishing, to think about what is going to be the next. It's very hard, I know, but like just always have a next plan after a plan.
Yeah. And do you have any plans for what you're going to be making or working on next?
Yes, I have, but I don't want to share because it's very in development stage, so it won't be wise, I think.
That's fair, but I think the take home from that is always be thinking of something else, especially when you're in the process of making something, having something else in the pipeline. Thanks so much, Alexa. It's really interesting to hear your thoughts on kind of making Colors of Tobi. I really urge everyone to go and watch it if you haven't. It's on BFI Player and it's such an inspiring film, and gives a really detailed portrayal of Tobi's journey. So I would really recommend watching it if you haven't done so already. Sweetheart is a very different film. It's a fictional film which centers around AJ, a queer 17-year-old who finds love in a holiday park. But the film also focuses really heavily on AJ's relationship with her family and how that's navigated. Michelle, I'd now like to turn to you and just ask you a bit about your experiences of working on Sweetheart. Hi. I found Sweetheart again to be such a brilliant film, and it really captured for me the feeling of being 17 very, very strongly. And I found it really relatable. And I think lots of people will, the feeling of being on like a family holiday as a teenager. Just a very specific feeling. What was it that interested you about the dynamic of a family on holiday together?
I think it's something that most of us have experienced as teenagers, just being dragged on a family holiday that you really don't want to be on. Yeah, I guess just being able to look at the nuances and the ways in which this family are kind of have their painfully honest relations, with AJ at the center of it, having just come out, and how they kind of all navigate that together whilst Tina just wants them to have a lovely holiday.
Yeah, that's something I really felt, and I think that is such a relatable feeling when you're on holiday, and the pressure for it to be a really good time often makes it a very not a good time. And I felt those tensions in the film like really strongly. I mean, in the film, as you just said, like AJ has just come out, but the coming out doesn't happen as part of the film, doesn't happen on screen. Whereas lots of other stories really, with characters the same age, really focus on that as the narrative, sort of the coming out narrative. Can you talk a bit about why the decision around avoiding that and having it that she'd already come out before the film started?
Yeah, I mean, Marley specifically set out not to tell a coming out story. She specifically didn't want it to be, about AJ coming out. And it was more about what happens after you come out. So how does this young lesbian navigate, coming out to her family, and then, okay, what happens next? How is she dealing with her identity and then, falling in love for the first time? And of course, the teenage issues that, you're just a moody teenager and you don't want to be around your family. But yeah, it was more about, telling that uplifting story and having young queer teenagers see themselves being represented on screen nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really nice that both of you have said as well, that although, as queer people, we're also just teenagers. I mean, and feeling the same feelings on holiday as everybody would with their family at that age. And I found it really empowering to watch a story that wasn't centered around coming out, just because I feel like we have so much of that narrative, especially in fictional film. in Sweetheart, we see AJ and her whole family, but like quite strongly with her mum, trying to just navigate their relationship. And at times her mum makes really homophobic comments and there's a lot of tension, but there's also a real closeness. Why was it important for you to create such a nuanced relationship? And how, do you know anything about how that familial closeness was achieved from the actors?
Yeah, I mean, Tina, she's not homophobic. We specifically didn't want her to be homophobic. She's very accepting of AJ, but her comments do come from a place of fear. So, you know, Tina's generation wasn't, you know, it wasn't, the queer community weren't as visible, and it wasn't always okay to be gay and to be out and to be proud of it. So her, you know, her comments come from a place of just wanting to protect her child. And she's never, you know, she never says anything to AJ that AJ takes offense to. She's just like, oh, there's mum again talking about me dressing like a boy, you know. So it was very important to show Tina as a mother accepting her daughter. And, you know, the biggest problem she has is AJ's attitude. AJ just not listening to her mum. And it was great working, you know, Jo Hartley is fantastic. And she really took Nell under her wing, and they were they had a couple of rehearsals together, and they had some chats beforehand to figure out what is the relationship between these two. And, you know, they're very similar as well in character. When you see the film, you're like, you know, AJ does things that her mum does, and it's like, you two are just the same, just sit down and talk about it. But yeah, it was really nice to watch them be able to kind of harness those characters really well.
Yeah, I did really notice that watching the film, that there is a real similarity between them both, and those moments when you realize that you're actually quite a lot like your parent, and you're like, oh, yeah. I felt that quite a lot. I think that was a really nice detail in their relationship. Can you talk a bit about how the family, like, or I don't know how much you would have been involved in this, but like building the family up as it was? So obviously she's got a younger sister and an older sister who's there with her boyfriend and the mum, like why you chose that family dynamic rather than just her, being just her and her mum, and her dad's not there. Could you talk a bit about the family dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, we specifically, Marley didn't want to have the story of the dad out there as a he's just not there. That's, you know, it's nothing that we have to ask a question about. We're more interested in this family, and specifically the 3 generations of women, I think, that are really interesting. And, you know, and little Dana as well. You've got the 3 sisters. I'm one of 3. I'm the oldest of 3, so I'm more like Lucy in that respect. I think my younger sister will probably agree with that. And then, you know, Steve as like just AJ's confidant. It was always really important for us to have a kind of Steve character, you know, that she could speak to. I think I've forgotten the question. Have I answered it?
Yeah, I just was interested to see why you picked that sort of family dynamic, but I think, you've answered it. And there were some such beautiful moments between AJ and Steve throughout the film, especially when I was like, oh, AJ, everything's so rubbish, and then Steve would just enter and you're like, oh, thank God he's back.
He just provides that kind of, you know, confidant person who, you know, doesn't tell her that she needs to change her name and this, that and the other. And it was Samuel Anderson does just an amazing job. Everyone's favorite character is Steve.
We all love Steve, Team Steve. So you also produced Marley Morrison's previous short, Baby Gravy, which also focused on family and queerness. Did that film inspire the making of Sweetheart at all?
Not directly, I wouldn't say, but with both films, it was more about telling an authentic story, and also highlighting relationships. So Baby Gravy highlights same-sex relationship, and Sweetheart, you know, puts a young lesbian character right at the forefront of the story. So I think it's, you know, Marley's film Leroy kind of centers around family, and then chosen family as well. So, you know, it's a topic that she's kind of been interested in and been honing throughout the shorts, and it kind of felt like a natural, like a natural fit to tell a story about a family.
Yeah, I think also if people haven't seen it, please do check out Baby Gravy. If you just Google it, you can find it. It's really great as well, and really nice to see both of the films and the kind of similarities, but also the differences between them. So both of those films were made by Hazy Jane Films, which champions LGBTQI plus stories and talents behind the camera as well as in front of the camera. How important to you is it to have queer voices represented and heard kind of throughout the whole filmmaking process in a range of roles?
Very important. It's why we do what we do. It's, you know, it's the same vision that we had when we first met and decided that we wanted to work together, to put queer stories at the forefront, to push them into the mainstream, you know, to also tell stories that the queer community can relate to see themselves reflected on screen, you know, whether it's young adults watching Sweetheart or a couple in a, you know, same-sex relationship trying for a baby in Baby Gravy, and also behind the camera as well. You know, we want to be able to push talent in front of and behind the camera, because yeah, it's time and there's no reason why not.
I love that. Talent in front of and behind the camera, definitely something that's also not talked about. I feel like we focus a lot on queer narratives and what we see on screen, but there's not as much chat about, yeah, queer people working behind the camera as well. So I was wondering, from a kind of producer's point of view, how did you procure, I can never say that word, how did you get the budget for both of the Hazy Jane shorts, but also to make this the first feature, Sweetheart?
So the very first short we made was Sticks and Stones, and that was, you know, £200. We, you know, Marley just thought, I just want to go out and make something, and I kind of came on board when we were casting that one. So that was just, Marley just wanted to go out and make something, and so we did that one quite quickly. It was over 2 weekends, a couple of £100 to pay the chaperones and feed people, and then that, being able to edit that, and that was in the BFI Raw Short scheme at the time, I think it's 2015. And then having been able to do that, then we decided to crowdfund for the next one. So Leroy was a collaboration with Nathan Bryan, who is writer, actor, director extraordinaire. And yeah, we crowdfunded on Kickstarter for that. So we did a big social media campaign, and I think we had submitted that one for public funding, but we didn't get it. So we were like, okay, we'll just do it ourselves. What can we do? So that one was crowdfunded. And having done Leroy, we were then able to apply to public funding with London Calling BFI Network, which is run by Film London. And that was our first public funding. We got public funding for Baby Gravy. So it was kind of like the stages of funding the shorts. And through doing that, we then applied for Microwave, Film London Microwave, which is specifically for debut filmmakers, first feature filmmakers. And yeah, and then the rest is history.
I think, again, the take home there is just, if you can get a bit of money together to make your first short, that's definitely a great place to start. Because obviously I think there's a lot of pressure on, like, we need to get public funding in order to make our first film. So it's really nice to hear that that doesn't always have to be the way you make the first one, and then that can lead on to bigger things as well.
Yeah. And you might not get funding if you're applying for your first film, and you know, sometimes funding bodies like to see that you've done something off your own back, so to speak. So if it's your first short that you're working on, just go out and make it. You know, don't do an action film where you need a car chase, probably. You know, do something that is focused on the actors and the story, something that's easy for you to film, get your friends involved, people who want to have something on their CV, and then, you know, progress to the next stage from there.
And what would you say are the barriers that are kind of there, and I hope there aren't any, but I imagine there are, when you're trying to get a film with an LGBTQI plus storyline produced?
It was hard to raise finance. So for the microwave scheme, the BFI and BBC give you 100,000 towards it, and then the producer has to raise 50K. So I was raising money in early 2019, which was the year that everyone was scared of what would happen with Brexit. That was the only thing we worried about at the time. And no one was investing, especially in micro-budget movies, because they couldn't guarantee a return, and we were debut filmmakers. So people kind of saw it as a risk to finance on a micro-budget level. So I spent a long time trying to go to the usual financiers and, you know, the usual way of doing things. And then I found it a bit disheartening when people weren't willing to take a chance on a new voice. And no one said specifically that it was the subject matter. I think everybody saw, you know, what Marley was trying to do with the story. It definitely has been hard in the past raising money, especially for the shorts and stuff, with the LGBT storyline. But for micro budget films and for debut filmmakers, if you don't have a scheme behind you, sometimes it can be really difficult to kind of push it forward. But yeah, I persevered. I just believed so much in Marley and in the story, and I knew that we had to shoot that year, and eventually raised the money with a very, very tight deadline. But I did have to change my strategy quite a few times during that process.
Yeah, I think there's some really great advice in there as well about having, changing your strategy. Because I think, again, it's just so easy to think you'll get that funding in the first round you apply for something, and then kind of putting things into place. If that doesn't work, like, what else can we do? And just leading off from that, what tips would you give to emerging producers or people who are maybe looking to help produce their first couple of shorts, and also people who are kind of hoping to form their own production companies? Because obviously Hazy Jane is so successful. So do you have any tips?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, if you're developing a short, watch a lot of shorts, read some short scripts, do the work so that you can make sure that you know what structure you need to be following. If you're developing a feature, same thing, watch as many debut features as possible, study the scripts, and then take what works for you and your story, and so that when you're pitching, you know what you're talking about, being specific with your story. That's more for kind of writer filmmaking teams, but for producers, I would say learn as much as you can. Don't be afraid to take inspiration from other places. Get some experience, whether it's on set or shadowing someone, or even if you want to just get some on-set experience and the only opportunity is to be a COVID supervisor, go and do that so that you're on set. The practical experience as a producer is what you should be trying to get whilst you're learning the other stuff, which is what I did as well. I started off in TV feature documentaries and just learnt all about the production side of things. Work on stories that you're passionate about as well, something that you relate to or that you understand, and don't be afraid to try new ways of doing things.
That's really great. I loved hearing you say as well of, like, don't be afraid to take inspiration from other people. I think, again, that's something I've felt. You're very much like, I need to be the first person to do it like this, which is great, but also sometimes it's useful to look at how other people do things. And also, especially watching shorts or watching features about and watching stories that really interest you. I think that's something we often don't talk about a lot as well, but just consume things that you find interesting. I think that all helps lead into it. I'd now like to open up the discussion to both of you and just ask some questions about family and queerness in general and how it's represented on screen. So it's a sad truth, but at the moment, LGBT youth make up 24% of homelessness in the UK. and it's highly likely that those people will have experienced familial rejection, abuse, and violence. So it's a pretty dire situation. Do you think that more positive portrayals of family and queerness and accepting families could have a positive impact and help families accept their queer children more? And I'm sure you do, but if you could talk a bit about how you think seeing that on screen can have a positive impact.
Does Alexa want to go first?
Thank you. So, yes, I think it's important that they can find the similarities in these stories, like, oh, I used to go to holiday just like them, or oh, I'm cooking just like Tobias' mother. Like to find, like, there's not such big differences between those families, and the best thing you can do is accept your children, because you don't have to understand. Just support, please.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, again, we talk a lot about, as queer people, having to see ourselves on screen and that being really, really important. But I think also there's something to be said as well in seeing supportive family members as well and being able to learn from that. So I think that's really, really relevant. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I echo Alexa's thoughts, and the more we bring queer stories into the mainstream and we show the universal themes as well within these families, because a family is a family, you know, they're all going to be going through the same things. And visibility breeds acceptance, and it's going to be a long, hard road, and we've done well so far, but the more we can, the more we can show these families and these stories in a more uplifting way as well. I think we said before about not always having the stories rooted in trauma. The closer we will hopefully be to a more understanding world. The plan.
And how did you both find portraying the theme of family and queerness? And was there any challenges? And I'm sure there was challenges in making both of the films, but was it kind of easier or more difficult than you thought to portray those themes? Or what hurdles did you face when you were making both of your films?
In my case, there were a lot of things that were just there, but I also had to educate myself a lot. And I thought that I know a lot about gender non-conforming people, and I've seen enough films, and I've read enough books, and I've talked to enough people, but there are always some extra things that always and I think that makes the acceptance also hard, because it's a topic that you have to educate yourself on. You have to work on your knowledge, and somehow it would be also nice to after those films are raising awareness, to give the people platform to educate themselves about LGBTQ topics.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree.
I think that's also something that's important to remember, of like how much we've all still got to learn about different people and their identities. And I think that's something that your film, Alexa, shows really well, like the process of learning and understanding and accepting. It's just really prominent throughout. Something that I'm curious about is, because we've touched on it a bit previously, of how you both feel about your films kind of being categorized as queer films, because as you've said, they're also just films about teenagers and about their relationships with their families. And on one hand, it's empowering for them to be kind of categorized as queer films, but then there's also a kind of worry of them being sort of boxed in by that category. So I was just wondering if either of you have any thoughts on that at all.
Good question. I guess there's the argument for, why do we have to categorize it as LGBT? Why can it not just be a romance or a comedy or this and that? But then on the flip side, sometimes it helps certainly with pitching, because people still want a genre, and LGBT isn't really a genre, but it's you know, it's, I'm torn, I guess. I don't, I'd be keen to hear what Alexa thinks.
I think it's hard to avoid that.
Yeah.
But it's not wrong. So it's there. The film is very centered about the topic. And I always, when I have to introduce my film, I say that it's a family film and it has LGBTQ in it. So I like to always like have a little other, to show what else it is. And it's so hard to collect my thoughts, sorry. Like, it's not, because a lot of people are thinking that LGBTQ is propaganda. And it pisses me off. And that's why I'm saying it's a family film, watch it. Yes, it has this topic, but that's why we are doing this, like to see what it is in reality.
Yeah, I think it is just a really it's a tricky question. It's something I've thought about a lot, about whether these categorizing films like that helps. And I think there's something that's really great about this festival, about the Flare Film Festival, is that it's not just like one, it's not like here are all the films and then here's like 5 queer films. It's exploring films, like films made by queer filmmakers featuring queer characters, but in so many different genres and types. And I think there's something really nice there. So go watch films, people at home, if you haven't watched any yet, because there's loads of great stuff out there. I also wanted to ask, I feel like chosen families are incredibly important within the queer community and are also portrayed a lot in queer narratives. Did the concept of chosen family kind of influence either of your films, or is that something that you're interested in exploring in the future at all?
Chosen family in Sweetheart, I guess it didn't quite influence it. Influenced it in Leroy, for sure. In our first short was chosen family. Just families in general, I guess, queer families and relationships and stories, and we'll continue to keep exploring all aspects of those experiences and queer families in all their forms.
Alexa, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, in our case, like, it was not very, the chosen family part wasn't really there because of the real family, but there were many friends from the queer community, and also not only for Tobi, also for the parents. They were joining an LGBTQ parents allyship, and there were many friends from the community and also parents with queer children, and they are not involved in the film very much, but their presence in behind the camera was very there, and I was also happy to meet them and to get new inspirations.
Yeah, I also was just thinking about, just because also we've touched on it, that I think a lot of queer stories, especially with queer young people, they focus on the coming out narrative, or there's a coming out narrative which then shows families being taken by surprise or reacting negatively to the news and then accepting their children or not accepting them. And why do you think that's such a prominent narrative? And do you think it's important that we see films where families are initially unaccepting? Yeah, do you think that's an important thing for us to still be seeing?
I think, yeah, I mean, they do come from truth, I guess, these stories, and it is important to acknowledge queer history, and to know how far we've come and how difficult it used to be. Yeah. But it's also important to show queer stories with an uplifting message, with a joyful message, with a family that doesn't perhaps have a strong reaction to their child coming out. Again, the more we see and the more we're able to break stereotypes and depict real characters of today as well.
Yeah,
I think, you know, the easier and smoother it will be to move forward and be able to highlight these stories. But yes, we should acknowledge our history, but we can also tell stories of today that young queer kids are going through, because it's a lot easier to come out nowadays than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think definitely that's how I feel. I think there is still definitely a place for them, but I'm so happy that there's also now more films being made that don't just show that narrative, because I think, as you say, it has become easier for some people to come out, and I think it's important to kind of celebrate that and show that that's a really positive step in the right direction. Alexa, do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
Yes, I think in most cases that's what happens in Hungary, I'm sure, unfortunately. But yeah, and I also think that in our story, Tobi has many coming outs. And I think it's also good to see that it shouldn't be one certain moment. Sometimes it takes more time. And Tobi also told me, and it was his feeling after watching the movie, like they felt that they have to give time for the parents as well. So I think the part of being surprised, it's okay. And it's also okay when you have a trans kid to mourn the person who, for example, you had a daughter, and to mourn the daughter you had, to give yourself time and also give time to accept. So it's I think it's important to be more patient with also with relatives as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong message. I'm now going to ask some questions from the audience that they've been submitting throughout. Please keep submitting your questions. But we're going to start with one from Clara, and this is for Alexa. Clara asks, do you hope that your documentary could help attitudes towards trans people in Hungary?
I really hope. That's why I did the film. Yeah, we would like to premiere it in Hungary around July. And I really like to do a little campaign. And yes, I think because of also the village settling and like really very average family seeing this is, I think it can help a lot.
Yeah, I hope so. Really exciting that it's going to have its premiere as well. And then the next one's for Michelle, and this is from Janet. And Janet asks, did your previous experiences from making Baby Gravy impact the making of Sweetheart?
Yes. With each film, you learn what not to do because there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be things that happen, and you learn and adapt. So from Baby Gravy, I learned and adapted into things that we had to do for Sweetheart, whether it was, you know, for Baby Gravy, I think we missed a really important shot and we felt it in the edit. So, you know, before Sweetheart, every day Marley and I would sit down and be like, okay, what do we absolutely have to get today so that we don't miss this shot? So, you know, little things like that, and also just being prepared ahead of time. For Sweetheart, I just made sure I was always a step ahead of every process. And if I was waiting for Marley to send me a draft of the script, I would say, okay, what else can I be doing now? I wanted to be as prepared as possible. So yes, you will learn with every job and you will adapt with every job as well.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some really strong advice there, learning about your mistakes. I'm really interested to know what the shot was now that you felt weird was lacking, but you obviously won't tell me. That's fine.
I don't know if I should.
No, I think let's keep the illusion alive. And the next one is for Alexa, and it's from Charlie. And Charlie asks, how did you find portraying family and queerness? Was it easier or more difficult than you thought it was going to be?
I think it was more difficult than I thought it's gonna be, because of the time we spent there, and because of this form that we are using, no interviews. It really, because there are just observations and real life actions happening, and it was hard to build a story from those elements. And the editing was also quite long. We started editing almost immediately when we started the shooting, and we were always having notes on the wall and trying to drop things and try to find the key moments. Yeah, it was quite tough.
Can I ask why you chose to do the no interview technique?
Yes. It was because I felt that it's better to experience something, like you feel that you are actually there, than someone is telling you what happened in the past or what is going to happen in the future. I wanted to capture the present moment of the family's life.
Yeah, it's so interesting because watching it, I didn't notice that. I wasn't thinking like, oh, that's interesting, they're not doing interviews, but that probably has such a massive impact on why it felt so intimate and kind of, yeah, like honest in its portrayal. And now I think about it, I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. There was no kind of face-to-face interviewing. It's really interesting. The next one is for Michelle, and it's from an anonymous question asker. And they say, they're asking about the producer and director relationship. So how does your partnership with Marley work? And what is it that makes you work so well together?
I think we work very collaboratively, and because we both started our journey at the same time, we made sure that we learnt exactly what the other person was doing. So I was learning Marley's process in writing, directing, and then I was also informing Marley of what I was doing in producing. So there would always be a transparency and also a way that we would figure out a compromise. When you're working on low budget and micro budget, sometimes you have to change things according to your budget. Not sometimes, most of the time. You have to change things according to the very tiny budget that you have. But as a producer, you have to understand the writer's process in that you don't want to jeopardize their creativity. You don't want to jeopardize the story. So it's about finding a way to work together to find solutions. And yeah, being constantly collaborative in every way.
And just a question off the back of that, I think something that I've heard a lot in talks in this festival about like how important it is to have collaborators and have people that you work with. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you both started working together, but also how people go about finding collaborators, if you have any advice for that.
Well, festivals is usually a really good place to network. And even though you can't do it in person, I think there is a way that it can be done online. In terms of finding each other, so Marley and I were introduced through a mutual friend who was an actress who knew us separately, and she had the foresight that, oh, maybe you guys could work together. And from there, we met other collaborators through people. So when you go to festivals and events, you meet filmmakers or just helping out on someone else's short film. And just talking to people, really, it's so important to meet as many people as you can, and people in different departments as well, and learn about what they do in those departments. And then you can start to, work with them on your shorts and hopefully bring them onto your features and create a really nice, trusting, cohesive working relationship. But yeah, meet as many people as you can.
Yeah. Or maybe Alex can drop the networking page into the chat again now, which is on Facebook. So if you are looking to meet potential collaborators and network with people, I know it's always weird doing it online, but that is the world we're in right now. So definitely join that if you do want to meet some other filmmakers. And now we've got a question from Ollie, which is for both of you. And it is, how important is it to portray accepting families of queer people in the media? I know we've talked about that a bit, but yeah, if you could just reiterate how important you think that is.
Alexa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's very important. And I have a nice feeling that in Hungary, you assume that people are not accepting, but actually they are just never met people, never met queer people, or they just can't imagine that it can happen in their own families. And when it happens, of course, the reactions can be various, but I think that most families are love their children, and I heard a story. It connects to my film that there are people around this little village where Tobi and Eva lives, and the people were asking during work time, asking each other during work time, like, you heard about their stories, what would you do if your child would be transgender? And they were talking a lot about it, and they came to the solution like, yeah, I would accept it. It's my children. They are my children. So yeah, I think that sanity is still there and love is still there in people.
Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we need to represent the world that we're living in today, right? So by providing more platforms for LGBTQI+ stories on screen, then we work towards that slowly. So I think if you guys check like the GLAAD surveys, every year they do percentage of straight characters versus LGBT characters on screen. And every year it seems to be creeping up and seems to be creeping up. When you actually look at the things that you're watching and then you look at statistics and you think, wow, it's actually, there's still only 10% of characters across that are LGBTQ. And use that to push you to keep making these stories and to keep telling stories of queer families and queer relationships and queer people overcoming. And I'm now talking too much, but yeah, keep doing it.
I think both of those really inspiring answers, and hopefully will inspire some of you out there to keep telling these stories because they're important and we really need them. We've got another one from Michelle from another anonymous question asker. And they said, I'm interested in the decision to portray a romantic experience between AJ and a boy. Do you think it's important to show that queer people can still sometimes struggle with full personal acceptance beyond coming out?
Absolutely, because it's not a linear thing. You know, your sexual identity is something that can be ever changing. And I feel like as a young lesbian, you know, AJ is maybe she's still exploring, or maybe she just wanted to make sure. Everyone's saying, oh, you know, and then, you know, in order to make her realize. And I think it's very important. You don't just come out once, you know, you can come out as gay and bisexual, and then you keep coming out to certain family members, or you keep exploring what your sexuality is. And there is no one rule, you know. I think we, as a queer community, we've been fighting to come out of the box that we've been put into. So it's important to just showcase all aspects of queerness and show that it's okay.
Yeah, I also thought that scene was I really loved it because it felt really relatable. And it also spoke a lot to just the fact she's a teenager and that's what teenagers do, and that's okay and doesn't have any kind of bearing on her. Not that it doesn't have any bearing on her queer identity, but as you say, it's like it's still exploring, and that's something that is allowed and should be definitely okay. And I think as a film, it does really well at kind of trying to push the box a bit of what queer films have been put into. Yeah, and then we've got one more from Tom, which is for Alexa. who says, I'm really curious about this as well. How did you know when to finish the documentary? After 4 years, was it difficult to say goodbye to making the documentary?
Yes, it was very difficult. If it would depend on me, I would be still shooting. But you can never finish a film. You can just stop at one point, they say, and I think it's true. But of course, there are physical limitations. I had a crew, and you are never alone in this game. And somehow I always try to find out, is Tobi and the family still comfortable with it? And they were. I'm absolutely sure. But 4 years, it's a long time for the cast, for the crew, for everyone. And there is a point where you just have to really stop. And I think after Tobi's moving to the capital happened, I felt like an arc is closed now. And I think that we have to stop somewhere around there. We did a little extra shootings afterwards, but that was the moment where I felt that we are somewhere around the end.
How often did you go and film them over the course of 4 years?
We were from 3 hours away from this village, so we really had to plan in advance when to go. But I was always communicating with them about what is going to happen, in what emotional state they are. And they always shared information with me in advance, and then we decided. And there were 3 of us on set, camera, a DOP, sorry, and a sound designer, and the 3 of us were there. And András, the DOP, and Tamás, the sound designer, they were always the same people with me. I mean, I wanted them to always be there because of this intimate relationship that we had with the family. So I think it was a key factor not to change the crew members all the time. And I think we were shooting in every month around 3 or 4 days. So then we went there, we were sleeping close to the village, and those 3 or 4 days were always about the shootings. And then we came back, I went to work with the editor. We were watching back the material. We tried to do markers and collect what's interesting, what's not that interesting, somehow this way.
Amazing. That's a really interesting point as well about having the same DOP and sound person with you, because that's something I wouldn't have thought of, but actually makes so much sense if you're continually going back to visit a family that you have the same crew with you. We're almost at the end of the event. I'd like to ask one final question, which is, what advice, if you give one piece of advice to filmmakers who are looking to show queer narratives or center queer characters, what would that one piece of advice be? Putting you on the spot here, I'm sorry.
Oh, persevere. Have I said that already? Yeah.
Keep going.
Keep going and have conviction in your choices.
That's amazing. Alexa, do you have anything else?
And my advice would be, like, I heard a phrase, they say, give me the same but different. And I think it's very important in queer stories to find a new angle.
That's great. Persevere, stick to what you want to make it about, but also same but different. I think that's a really lovely way to end our discussion today. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for. I'd like to say a massive thank you to Alexa and Michelle for chatting with us today. I found it really interesting and illuminating. And I'd really encourage everyone, please go watch both Sweetheart and Colors of Tobi. They're available on BFI Flare. I think it'll be really interesting to watch them after we've had this discussion today, so make sure you do that. I'd also love to thank you all our attendees for joining us. It's been really great. Thank you for all your amazing audience questions, especially. It'd be great if you could fill out the feedback survey, which has just been popped in the chat now. It's really important for us to have your feedback so we can improve our events going forward. You're also going to receive that in an email from Eventbrite. So if you can't do it right now, you can still do it later. Isn't that great? Can you also please be sure to check out the Generation Now short film strand, which is available to watch for free on the BFI Player and on the BFI Film Academy and Flare Facebook pages. The Generation Now shorts all focus on being a queer young person in the world today. So they're really relevant to this discussion. They're also just really great films and they're free. So make sure you go and watch those. We'll then be hosting scene interviews with the Generation Now filmmakers next Thursday, the 25th of March, from 4 p.m. till 6:30 p.m. on the BFI Film Academy Instagram channel. So we'll be chatting with all the filmmakers there and you can also ask questions to them. So that's a really great opportunity for you to engage with some more filmmakers. I think that is it. I'd like to say a massive thank you again to Alexa and Michelle and to everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and enjoy the rest of your festival. Bye.
Thank you for having us.